So then, each of us is accountable to God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Friday marked the 19th anniversary of 9/11. It was a somber day for all Americans. It is especially somber for those whose loved ones died on that day or who were injured. It's a sad and somber day for those who are affected today with respiratory diseases or cancer or some other ill effect caused by the events of that day. On 9/11, we grieve as a nation. Many people asked on that day, and many people continue to ask, where was God? As we approach nearly 200,000 deaths from COVID-19 in the United States today, many are asking that same question. Where is God? Where is God in this pandemic? My response is the same for 9/11 as it is for the current pandemic. God is in the midst of it, in the mess, in the midst of the pain. God is where the suffering is greatest. That's the message and theology of the cross. Those of us who were alive in 2001 likely remember the 9/11 cross, welded steel beams from the North Tower that stood in the midst of the wreckage following the tower's collapse. Frank Selecki, a worker on the site, discovered the cross and brought it to the attention of others. Soon, those doing the painful work of search, rescue, and recovery began to treat the cross as a shrine, leaving notes, prayers, and other mementos on it or near it. Today, the cross is part of the permanent 9/11 memorial site. When I think about that cross as it stood in the midst of that wreckage, Paul's words to the church in Corinth echo in my mind. For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. The cross is a profound reminder that God is always to be found in the midst of suffering, in the midst of all human wreckage. Former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, was in New York City on September 11, 2001. He was at Trinity Church, Wall Street, very close to Ground Zero. At the time, he wasn't the Archbishop of Canterbury, he was the Archbishop of Wales. A thoughtful writer and theologian and a deeply spiritual man, he had been invited to speak at a conference on spirituality hosted by Trinity Church. When the first tower fell, everyone in that surrounding lower Manhattan area had to be evacuated, including Rowan Williams and all those who were at Trinity Church. From his experiences of that awful day, Williams wrote a book called Writing in the Dust after September 11th. It's a short book, but very thoughtful, as Rowan Williams' books tend to be. Two insights in Williams' book struck me as particularly important. In the first chapter of the book, a chapter titled Last Words, Williams made the unsettling observation that there was a great contrast of language that day between the terrorists, who used religious language to justify their heinous acts, and the non-religious language of those on planes and in the towers, who used their final moments to express their love to a person dear to them. It was a contrast between what he labeled the murderously spiritual and the compassionately secular. Williams writes, quote, "Someone who is about to die in terrible anguish makes room in their mind for someone else. For the grief and terror of someone they love, they do what they can to take some atom of that pain away from the other by some inarticulate message on the mobile." In the book's second chapter, Answering Back, he has another insight about language. He writes, quote, "The day after, there was a phone call from Wales from one of the news programs, and I faced a familiar dilemma. The caller started speaking to me in Welsh, which I understand without difficulty, but don't always find easy to use in an unscripted and possibly rather complex discussion. I had to decide," he wrote, "if I answered in Welsh, the conversation would go on in Welsh, and I had some misgivings about coping with it. I am spoken to," he writes. "I have some choices about how to answer." It seemed a telling metaphor at that particular moment, Williams observes. Violence is a communication, after all, of hatred, fear, or contempt. And I have a choice about the language I'm going to use to respond. If I decide to answer in the same terms, he writes, that is how the conversation will continue. It's a provocative observation. Of course, there were many and various responses to 9/11, and there continue to be. And responses differ, especially if one is directly connected to the events of that day. The anguish is still raw 19 years later for those who were there, for those who escaped and survived, for those who lost loved ones in New York, Washington, or Pennsylvania. None of us can speak for them. None of us can or should tell them how to feel, how to respond, how to grieve. Still, if we are honest, we must acknowledge that 9/11 seduced too many of us into modes of lasting hatred, fear, anger, prejudice, and vengeance. In fact, since 9/11, this country has become increasingly divided, increasingly polarized. Hatred has now become epidemic. Increasingly, neighbor is turning against neighbor with vitriol and violence. What has happened to us as Americans since 9/11? What language do we speak? What language do we speak as Christians? Consider today's appointed readings. Paul writes to the church in Rome, "We do not live to ourselves, and we do not die to ourselves. If we live to the Lord. And if we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's." That's gospel news to me as I think about those who died on 9/11. They inspire me as I consider those who made the ultimate sacrifice. We do not live to ourselves. Each and every fireman and police officer who entered the inferno of the Twin Towers and the Pentagon knew that. The passengers who fought with the hijackers over Pennsylvania knew that. We do not live to ourselves, and we do not die to ourselves. If we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So then, whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. Yes, that's gospel news to me as I consider doctors and nurses and the essential workers who day in and day out serve people in the midst of the current COVID-19 pandemic, knowing there are risks, real risks, life-threatening risks. Yes, Paul's words speak to me today. But so does Paul's challenge. Why do you pass judgment on your brother or sister? Or why do you despise your brother or sister? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of God. How can we not pass judgment on those who acted with such brutality, with such a callous and heinous disregard for human life, as those who hijacked the planes on 9/11? How can we not despise them? Or the Nazis who gassed millions of Jews and others in 1940s Germany, or those who commit violent crimes in our workaday world, or who engage in acts of betrayal that do lasting harm even to our personal relationships. Well, judgment does not belong to us. Judgment belongs to God alone. If we insist on judgment, what do we do about the judgment which must be rendered upon us as a nation that has dropped hundreds of thousands of bombs, launched drone missiles since hostilities began in Iraq and Afghanistan, killing innocent civilians, many of them women and children, and labeling those casualties with the misnomer collateral damage? It's a pattern we repeat over and over and over again. What about the language of judgment here? And what do we do with today's gospel reading concerning forgiveness? What about Peter's question? Do we need to forgive as many as 7 times? Or 7 times 70? What about Jesus' response, which really doesn't mean 77 times? It means we are to forgive our brother or sister countless times. And what about that parable of the unforgiving servant? Who is that unforgiving servant? Who are we in the story? Are we the ones owed the debt? Are we the ones who show mercy? Are we the ones to whom mercy is shown? Biblical scholar Douglas Hare observes that Jesus provides the theological grounding for unlimited forgiveness by means of a parable. He writes, "It is important to note that this is not simply a go and do likewise parable like that concerning the Good Samaritan. It is a kingdom parable. Therefore, the kingdom of God may be compared to." Peter's question addresses a human problem from a human perspective. The parable grounds forgiveness in the nature of God. This is what God and God's kingdom is like. It is marked by extravagant, generous, gracious, unmerited forgiveness. That first servant had a debt so large it would have been utterly impossible to pay. He was forgiven that enormous debt by the God figure in the parable. In contrast, he did not forgive his fellow servant a much lesser debt, which frankly could have been paid. Jesus is confronting us through this parable, challenging us with contrasting images: the abundant, generous grace and forgiveness of God, and the mean-spirited, tight-fisted, begrudging disposition we human beings too often display. You might be asking, aren't there some things that truly are unforgivable? How can we ask or expect those husbands or wives or sons and daughters who were brutally murdered on 9/11 to forgive? I can't answer that question. Each person must answer that question for him or herself. Each and every one of us must always answer the question of forgiveness for him or herself. And there is such a thing as accountability. Jesus addressed that last week when he told us what to do when a member of the church sins against us. Confront them, he said. Take along others with you if you need to. Are there things that are unforgivable? That's a really difficult question to answer. But we should also ask, what is the cost to us when we don't forgive? What do we do to ourselves? Do we not allow ourselves then to be victimized over and over again by a reliving of the wrong done to us? Do we not then give tremendous power to those who have wronged us? What kind of people does this make us? What kind of people has it made us? Forgiveness is not only a matter of grace we extend to others, it is an act of grace we extend to ourselves. And more than that, it is a means of grace by which God heals us and makes us whole through his abundant forgiveness of us. This is the language and reality of forgiveness. In a commentary on this passage on the Working Preacher blog site, Professor Audrey West is insightful, writing, "The parable speaks a truth that is familiar to many who have experienced injury or trauma at the hands of another. One's ability to forgive does not always come easily, nor is it necessarily a quick or simple process. At times it is necessary to forgive from a distance. Some wounds are so deep, some debts so large," she writes, "that human forgiveness is next to impossible. Indeed, there may be circumstances for which the most faithful response is to seek the assistance of a trained counselor or spiritual director to aid in the process of healing." She continues, Peter's question, "How often should I forgive?" and Jesus' answer, 70 times 7 or 77 times, suggests that forgiveness may well be a long and difficult process rather than a week-long project. Yes, forgiveness is work, hard work, just as love is work, hard work. Love and forgiveness are the work Christ has given us. "Forgive us our trespasses," he taught us to pray, "as we forgive those who trespass against us. A new command I give you, that you love one another," he said. A command, love one another. Christ's mission, God's mission, is the mission, the work of reconciliation and love. It is the work of God's reign. It is the work to which God calls each of us each and every day. It is not easy, this work. In fact, it's the work of a lifetime, but it's holy work, life-giving work. It is the work that has power to transform us and transform the world.